Hello friends, it's time for another installment of looking through my childhood notebooks. Last week was kind of a crazy week around here and I didn't get to do any script, so I figured it's a good time to catch up on this because it is very unscripted. So if you were here for the last installment, I saved all the notebooks and sketchbooks from my childhood, teenage years, etc. and I've been slowly going through them. I haven't personally looked at them in years, so I don't remember what's in there. And it's not very filtered. It's pretty much just me being like, oh my gosh. If you've been following my channel, you know I've been writing about the same fantasy world for 30 years. So these are the earliest origins of it. And in the last installment, I went through notebooks that were mostly from like age 11 and 12. So here we might be getting into age 13, maybe 14. Although there's also a couple on the pile that are a little older. You know, sometimes I had written down like an order for them, but I wasn't always very accurate about it. And if you didn't watch the first installment, you know, I don't think you're probably going to be missing a whole lot, but I will link to it at the end if you want to go back and watch that one. We might be starting to get into some characters that you will actually meet in the modern day novels. I'm not sure. It's like I said, I don't remember what's in here. But either way, it ought to be a fun time. So let's see what this pile has in store. And if you are just joining me, I'm Lydia Foxglove. I'm a fantasy author. I've been both traditionally published and independently published and making my living doing this since 2009. Okay, so I didn't get to this one last time, but it is clearly one of the older notebooks. And here we have apparently a play version of The Secret Garden with all of my Dark Worlder characters cast in the roles of the characters from The Secret Garden. So good old Dalaran. Oh goodness, we got a cat here. Good old Dalaran appears again, this time cast in the role of Colin. And oh boy, what do we have? This is immediately getting very saucy. "You little bitch," Mrs. Medlock exclaimed. Mary silenced and seethed. That was pretty saucy language for me at this point. This is getting really incoherent and, "Hi, I'm Dickon. You're cute. Want me to force you to pet my dirty old crow?" That was written with the innocence of a child, but it really doesn't read well to my adult brain. I'm guessing this was supposed to be like a parody version. Mrs. Medlock, she's probably married to Matlock, the boy continued. And in the last one we had a George Burns joke and now we have a Matlock joke, so I'm feeling ancient. Okay, and if you're just joining me, and like goodness knows, if you're just joining me, you're going to be even more confused than ever, but in this Dark World, there was a character based off of Kramer from Seinfeld, but he was the child of the Dark Worlders. I believe this is Kramer. He looks like he's caught in the baggage claim at the airport, and here is the master of the Dungeon of Doom, Jonathan, and his wife Lyra watching their Kramer child come through the baggage claim at an airport. And then we got this sassy little leg here. Okay, now this you know is going to be important because it has a big Spartan title that just says war and a lot of dead space and then Dalaran with his sword. So if you watched my recent world building video, you may remember that one of my world building tips for making your world unique was to just put in whatever you really like. And this page is a perfect example of me doing that at this point. Yes, this was the lineup for Good Evening Drenal, with a mix of relatable news to my child self and the news of their area. Hurricane heading toward Otare, blizzards in the Dungeon of Doom area. We got some local, apparently the League of Christian Lightworlders starts trek to go defeat Dalaran. That was definitely derived from the awkward evangelical homeschooled kids I kept dealing with. And then we had video games. There was going to be a Xanth game for the Jaguar, a Nightmare Before Christmas 2 movie. There was also going to be a real Marsupilami made. That was a cartoon that was on at the time, if you were not an older millennial. there was a new cat that stays kitten size forever. And Death ditches robe for elf outfit, handsomer than ever. Oh, and, you know, we got to keep up with what Torval and Dean, the ice dancers, are doing. Okay. Then we have the women's history of fashion in Drenal, which you could tell that I'd been reading books on fashion history, and it had been impressed upon me that some fashions of the past were bonkers. So I was like, I'll see you that and raise it by a factor of 10 with the women's history of fashion in Drenal. Fashion did not come in comfortably as it did with other cultures. In the early days, women would grow their hair down to the floor. Then the husbands would sew nets, roses, fake birds, pouches of money, coins, locks of his hair, photographs, jewelry, small paintings, cloth scraps, even plants in pots which he would water every day into the hair. Then he would spend an entire day putting braids in the right places. I mean, I'll give that the men were some very skilled hairdressers. Then he would bind the hair around the legs and chest of the woman and then arrange a net around her face after caking it with heavy white powder and bright red lipstick. The lady would be carried to a chair where she would sit and not move all day. Every day she would throw a party, although he would tend it, because no one could move. Her husband would feed her, and at the end of the day, stand her in the shower and hose her down. Well, at least they had indoor plumbing. In 2 months, he would redo it again. This would continue from when the woman's hair was long enough until she was 50 years old.
And I like to kick, stretch, and kick. I'm 50.
Then they kind of just had a beehive going on with a very simple dress. And then it got crazy again. Next came, for 1 month, a perfectly outrageous fashion when women put a layer of heavy padding around their hips and then a round coffee table was put on them. Then she was sat on a chair with wheels. She would steer herself with pedals. I don't remember this at all. It's so stupid. Okay, I've taken a minute to recover. Children born then often never got to stand, and many active young girls were forced to sit for a whole month straight, often not even moving their legs. This is so committed for a 1 month fashion. And I guess here's that in action, although that doesn't really look like a round coffee table, but then we finally came an era of perfect comfort. I mean, there was a serious pivot. And then we had women shave their heads and put veils on. They put on very high platform shoes and many pounds of padding and petticoats. And then we had this for 500 years, which I don't know what kind of look that's going for. Now, for Death was always cute, why has ditching his robe made him the ultimate man? Is it his face? I just love the sound of Bride of Death. And I also included apparently the fan art section of Death. She was pretty good for age 7. And now it's time for another role-playing game that we're going to spend a bunch of time planning out so many characters for, but we will never do anything with any of them. It's a baby skeleton with a bunny outfit. Does there come a time in every adolescent girl's life when she asks, am I attracted to fawns? The answer was apparently no, because I don't remember this character and he never appeared. I'm onto a different notebook, and this one's really more of like a folder with paper shoved into it, so there's not really a lot in here, but I did think that it was amusing that I had writing class exercise, and the question seemed to be, who is your best friend, or something like that, and I started to write that it was my sister. I hope we can always be close. We don't fight that much anymore either. Scribble, and then I was like, my cat Galili is very sweet. And then I also wrote, I hope she doesn't die soon, and then cross that out. And then we have eternally relatable content. I haven't been enjoying writing as much lately because I hate beginnings of stories and my hand gets tired. Okay, and we are finally moving on. January 1st, 1995, so I was about to turn 13. Absolutely nothing says I just discovered X-Men like now Deb was trying to make her ultimate creation, a cyborg with an elfin brain and soul. His body would be adamantium X, the strongest substance in the world. Yes, this continues to be in the I just read The Mists of Avalon phase, but it comes off like a terrible soap opera. Just truly terrible dialogue. I'll not have my wife acting like a little mouseling, timid and hiding. You apologize now, Gildon yelled. I'm not your wife, Casper sobbed. How could he strike me, she thought. Agah, Gildon yelled. He hit Casper on the neck. She pitched forward onto the bowl of candy, breaking it and scattering the candy around the room. Death rose and drew his knife, his eyes wide in surprise. He punched Gildon, causing him to tumble onto Casper, pressing her further into broken glass. This is a lot of reaction for very little incident. Then we have one of the plot lines that Dade always brings up to, gently tease me about for the rest of my life, which is that my character Ren is described as having a weak neck and needing a special collar to hold his head up. So his brother comes in to where the seamstresses, the royal seamstresses, are working and sabotages his collar with a spell so that when he's going to put on his special outfit for whatever the heck is going to happen, apparently the collar is going to give out and I guess his neck is just going to be like, where did this idea come from? Where? Also, I must know that Ren was supposed to be the it character at the time, and that was what I thought was a good tragic past, is that he was born with a genetically weak neck. Apologies to anyone watching this who may have a weak neck. Okay, and here is another appearance of Det, who is the only character that has stayed in the story the entire time, but this is the original version of Det, where he was basically a ripoff of Setzer from Final Fantasy VI, down to the fact that I apparently had to come up with the cards of the Executioner, the 54 fatal cards of Det, which all did various things. I mean, man, if Setzer had been able to do all this in the game, he'd definitely be able to kick some ass. He was a 60,000-year-old demon who was 7'9" because, we couldn't do anything subtly. If Det didn't already have a middle name, it would surely be Gambling. Det lives to gamble and gambles to live. He was a successful businessman who made his money buying and selling stocks and then purchasing the theater and opera house, as well as opening an art museum. But the real money for Det was in playing high-stakes poker. He would put his house, car, sacred possessions, or stocks on the line and win. Soon Det had a reputation as vicious, mischievous, and cheating, and was one of the 5 richest people in the land. But in truth, Det was a pretty nice guy. His life ruined by growing up on the sleazy side of town. This is about the only part of his past that is still accurate. Det was devastated when his young manhood friend Beauty was kidnapped and taken to slave camp. I don't think that ever came up again, whatever slave camp is. Though Det was a very powerful demon, his powers were not developed enough to save Beauty. He was devastated when he couldn't save her and left his home, Syriana, which I did not realize was at all connected to anything real, to use his gambling skill to climb up the status ladder in Morningville. Det was extremely ruthless and cold, and those on top hated the cruel demon who tried to climb his way up. Det went frequently to the bar, where he took out his anger on the slave camp on willing, aggressive men, but soon Det realized he was acquiring too many scars to be attractive anymore. Oh no, and he then resented himself. Yet he now wanted bed partners and got what he wanted. Still, he was unattractive and stuck in a rut until he met Fleur, Nariva, and Mordai, saved Beauty, and built an airship called the Executioner. You really would not think that this character was going anywhere. Here is the summary, I guess, of all the comics I was going to put out in my wildest dreams. Death's Wish, The Tribe, Memory Lane, The Women of the Moon, and Shrouded Ones are the new titles, with miniseries Cards of Death and Wired beginning 1996. The bi-monthly Death's Wish follows the confused and friendly elfin Grim Reaper as he sorts out his life and mind between his evil, demonic dark side from his father, the devil, and his dominating side, the friendly and fun-loving elfin side, his mother side. The monthly The Tribe focuses on the cyborg elf Erengale Jumper and his weak neck, keeping a menagerie of personalities together as a somewhat unofficial chief. Supporting characters include his wife Lisa, Det the Demon Gambler, his friends Fleur the Elf Demon and Nariva Elf, their children Blade and Dread, Eren's adopted demon son Logan, and Logan's girlfriend the demoness Balin, who is Det's child, Beauty, who is Balin's mother, Leknin, Woodsprite, Jake, and Sime, Frank and Carol, and drop-in visits from the evil demoness, Blue Demoness. Shrouded Ones tells of the loner elves of the Taken planet, a planet overrun by aliens. They now are on the run, for their hides are wanted by the alien leader. Ronwin, Jerry, Vinaya, Spree, what others hide in the shadows? I mean, you know, we gotta find out what happens to Jerry. Does a single page of any of this exist? Or did it ever exist? No. Then we have several more pages. This is really more than I usually wrote. Of the saga of the sabotage collar that was going to ruin Eren's neck at the party. I can't believe, out of all the stories, considering how hard it was for me to finish anything at the time, or like write this much, that I really stuck to this one for a while. And like it's not even worth reading because it's taken so seriously and is written with such slow pacing. But there was so much drama. There's like a prophecy, something bad is going to happen to Eren, and it's all about this collar of his jacket that's going to cause a catastrophic neck strength failure. I must note that even in 1995, I had not forgotten Final Fantasy IV and was still apparently throwing in random character profiles. I don't know why this was here, but clearly I was still engrossed in Final Fantasy. And then we have another deeply stupid character, Ban the Mummy Boy. He was named Ban because he had bandages, because he was a mummy. And this whole story just makes me hate this kid and wish that he had just died. Ban sighed and gazed out at Arya, a bit regretfully. Arya and Siahari, his two greatest loves, were not even that great, but he still yearned for them with a need for passion. Sometimes this urge bothered him. It was so strong. Was it some leftover from his human side? He stirred, shifting his legs, which were wrapped tightly in bandages. Ban was a mummy, and his bandages were magic that preserved him to handsome standards forever. The drawback was he was stuck bound up in bandages nearly every day of his life, but he didn't really care that much for all the advantage it caused. I'm guessing I meant disadvantage. As long as he was cute under all those wrappings. He didn't care if no one ever saw. And the story pretty much ends after that. Ban's entire story is he's a mummy, and he maintains handsome standards underneath his bandages. Oh, and he's horny. Here's some truly killer dialogue. I really want that car, Det Ariani told his friend Pascal. Pascal stared at the black convertible. That's not so great. I want that motorcycle. I don't. Cars are better. Motorcycles are for kids. No, they're not. That's silly. Motorcycles are cool. No way. Girls think cars are cooler. Not my girl. Kendra, you think she'll want to get on a motorcycle? She'll just scream and my girl will like a car too. Det, your girlfriend drives a motorcycle. Oh, snap. This is how guys talk to each other, right? That's accurate. Somebody confirm. At the time, apparently, Det was very much in love with a woman named Dama. I don't remember her at all. But here is her life story. One page. And then we get to Det's life, which is broken up in chunks of years. 1 to 5, 6 to 15, 16 to 9,856. And in that, 10,000 year period, that's where things really got weird. He joined the IFSS as a technology researcher. On a mission to a field to gather some odd metals and test machines, a war broke out when the IFSS head, Kat, showed up and injected us with her serum. The serum made us unable to harness magic energy. This started a war between the genetics researchers, cat side, and the technology researchers, led by an old war veteran who was a top researcher. The magic researchers picked sides. Every morning I would load my gun and run out and hide in a bush and shoot people. Boy, this is some research outfit. And from years 9,857 to 10,002, the war dragged on as usual, until one day I was clubbed in the head with a crowbar and knocked out. I wonder how long this war had been going on, how many of these 9,000 something years. After all that trauma, I went back to street life, getting in bar fights, gambling. I feel like at the time there was definitely a bit of Wolverine going on in the Det origin story. And here we have the cute ratings. All the characters ranked by how cute they are, I guess. And apparently Peddler, Jake the Peddler, he was the cutest. If I remember correctly, this was Jake the Peddler. Aww. We're into another notebook now. Here is where Leslie and Stan enter the story. Like, how do I even explain the Det Stan Leslie dynamic I was writing in the 90s? It goes on for a while. You're going to see a lot of these characters if you follow this gripping series. As soon as Dan and Leslie entered the story, Det's character kind of became different as a reaction to them. Stan is Det's son, who was born somewhat by accident, and during this period he was kind of the first of the blind characters that I ended up getting pretty deep into. There's kind of a whole thing with me where I think that blind characters were my way of working through a lot of my fears of like vulnerability, disability, all kinds of things, or just like kind of feeling like a misfit probably. So Stan was the first one that I really got in depth with, even though he still had a load of stereotypes about blind characters. It wasn't really like research or anything because I was just a teenager. But anyway, Stan was Det's son. He's mostly defined by being a rather nerdy guy who likes The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and is a like folk grunge, like that music of the mid-90s. He's a music nerd. And Leslie is kind of a ditz. Leslie and Stan are sort of best friends. Det sort of had this habit at this point in the story of taking in people who seemed like they needed help. And Leslie was like a ditzy girl who'd run away from home. He took her in, sort of to help her, but then they also had a romantic relationship with an uncomfortable power dynamic. You could probably think of Det as like a vampire at this point. Like, this could be like Twilight or something, because even though he's portrayed as old, when you're like described as being 60,000 years old, what does age even mean at that point? He's like the old vampire. She is the lamb that will be with the lion, and meanwhile you have nerdy musician son, who ultimately in the story, him and Leslie end up getting together just out of a sense of like, well, we've been best friends forever and we don't really have anybody else. I don't know if I'll ever get back to Det, Stan, and Leslie exactly. Det's definitely in the story. Stan and Leslie, I don't know. I don't know what I will do with those two. But that's a brief explanation about the era we're about to enter into. It is the mid-90s. And everyone is either a musician or a cool girl in a baby tee who likes anime. Oh yeah, and if you remember the backstory for Death, where he had to take on all these rules and he had to become Death to save him from dying, here is a later rewrite of that story. "What is the price?" he said. "You must be Death, but I am Death. You may take my place," said Moriah. She looked stately and distant. What do I have to do?" he cried. "You take the souls of the dead and take them to their place," she said. "You are always on call. You must always wear your uniform. You are ruler of the world of the dead. There is privilege and power and pain. I believe you would enjoy it. You are the devil's son." Well, we got some new backstory here. And you'll notice that he now is no longer banned from admiring Alice from the Brady Bunch or A lot of this notebook is taken up with a very long fantasy novel that I was working on that had nothing to do with any of this. It was just me experimenting with some new stuff, and I never finished it, and it had way too many point of view characters. Here's kind of the personality we were dealing with Leslie. At 15, Leslie got a job at Target. Jake hired her as a DJ. Wait, Jake was the peddler, right? And she moved in with the elves. Leslie was always a little crazy. She got her belly pierced in a drunken truth or dare game. She has hung out at clubs well past when she should, and she always has liked danger and was crazier than ever when she hopped off a cliff. Oh dear. But she knew what she was doing. The river flowed right to the undead spring, immortalizing Leslie. Oh my god, I totally forgot that she was undead. And we also have a new death in town. Yes, Paul Allamont, the man that we were reminded how incredibly handsome he was throughout these notebooks, has finally been replaced by Ryan the Reaper. And Ryan, of course, has a terrible backstory. Apparently he was the son of Jake the Peddler. We don't know much about Jake the Peddler, but he must have been important for a while. Jake kind of bummed off and left Ryan to be adopted. He was pretty happy and very shy. The downfall of his life was that he had to go to school, but even that was alright. But at 16, Ryan died. He had been wiped out by pneumonia. But even sadder, this was not his end. A crazy scientist had the power to create living sewing projects. The man went through many fresh bodies, and Ryan's head and a few other parts, such as personal ones for those who wonder, plus other parts from other people were used, just the skin. But since it was Ryan's head, it was Ryan's brain. Wait a minute, I thought it was just the skin. Also, where are like the bones coming from? I have some questions. It was the most horrible thing that had happened to Ryan. Oh my god, it was worse than school? He woke up that first time, his soul plucked from a joyous afterlife, into a body made of dead people's skin, sewn in every joint, and at the neck and waist with loose black thread, in the Nightmare Before Christmas style, and stuffed with cloth and leaves. Ryan was filled with horror at his own self, but he knew that Minlada would do what was best, so he made it through. Always good to have a little religious belief to carry you through a incredibly macabre Nightmare Before Christmasing of yourself. Still, oh, it's gonna get worse. Still, it was hard. His new body's creator made him a slave. Oh, dang. And the body was cold and far clumsier, and it was very easy to tear his stitches. They moved close to the elf town, where he was rescued. He was pretty bored and unpopular, though. Then Paul, the death of as long as anyone could remember, resigned his post and left it to random selection out of everyone he had ever met. Paul, is that a responsible way to deal with this problem? Mia Ariani was chosen. I don't know who that is. Mia resigned quickly to leave it to Hialeah, I don't know who that is, who also resigned, leaving it to Ryan Williams himself, and rules stated he could not resign for 132 years. That's very specific. At first, Ryan was horrified as his clothes vanished, replaced by what Ryan considered a simple black dress and a scythe nearly as long as Ryan sat in his hand. The robe shrunk to fit him a bit, but he was about the old Death size. So now he was Death. He was still shy and low on self-esteem, but outsiders thought him quite cute. Yeah, we're all about the undead stitched together boys here. Leslie's lousy love life. Leslie would never have guessed that she would have found herself thinking of death day and night, wishing that he had been born 62,000 years later. She thought of Ryan, too, a nervous shadow with stitches on his wrists and an adorable smile. The problem with being a teen girl in a fantasy world, I guess, you're torn between the 62,000-year-old man with the crazy powers and all the money, and the cute little undead boy made out of other people's skin. And yes, I had a fine tradition of writing very short stories that I didn't finish that are basically just the absolutely horrible ways that my characters were suffering. But I'd really gotten modern as far as what kinds of characters they were. Now we have Arian Werador. He loved Green Day and cool things, but was still unique. He published an underground comic called Earth. Nice vacation spot, but you wouldn't want to live there, featuring elves stranded on Earth without magic in human form. He tried unsuccessfully to play the fiddle and had other hobbies like Super Nintendo and taking cat snapshots of his cats, Billy Joe 2 and Ayla. Guess what's going to happen to this kid? He will be kidnapped by a hunting party of tribesmen and his tongue will be cut out. And then I never wrote anything about him ever again. And of course, then we have Stan and Lyria. The first months of my life were very horrendous. Well, I bet they were because you're in this universe. Oh yes, and then there's this famous story that I always think of as an example of the classic something terrible's gonna happen. Claude's adventure. Who's Claude? I don't remember him. I'm going out, Mom, Claude announced. What's the plan today? I thought we'd play Truth or Dare by the cutting machine. Yeah, a couple kids said. This almost seems like a parody of my own self. Someone's definitely losing a limb. I specifically remember the Reader's Digest drama in real life article I read at my great-grandmother's house that inspired the cutting machine. I was attempting to write an outline. You can see that my writing is very slowly progressing. That I'm no longer, well, I wouldn't say I'm no longer. That I'm starting to think, hey, it might be a good idea if I kind of plan things out a little bit. So let's have this incredibly incoherent plot that I'm not even going to read because, like, what the heck is even going on here? But you know what? I was trying. Let's see if I wrote any of the story. Not on this page. Oh, maybe. This might be it. The Cherry Coffee House. That's where they all hung out. Because you gotta have a coffee house for everyone to hang out in. I should note that the whole coffee house thing was actually quite pertinent to my real life at the time, although it was also definitely a ripoff of Friends. My dad was playing a lot of music at a coffee house that was open really late, and we would all go down there and watch him and his friends play and have lattes, and we would be there sketching our characters and feeling extremely cool. It was kind of like our first real taste of like nightlife. I was probably like 14 at this point, and it was right across the street from UCF. So it definitely had that like late night college atmosphere. And of course, since my dad was playing a lot of music, I was also hearing a lot of stuff about music gigs and music lingo and hearing musicians talk all the time. So inevitably that worked its way into the story. I love that I just wrote up some random personals ads for my world. Reckless young warlock seeks a daring young dame for exciting adventure. And then we have the entrance of Leo, another character who has continued through the story. And he was originally introduced simply to be a more ornery blind guy in a different band that was Stan's rival. He was pretty much meant to be kind of a gimmick character, and as often seems to be the case, the character that you invent on a weird lark ends up being the one that is like of core importance to the story as it goes. So he'll probably come back at some point, very different. Nevertheless, I do have to love this story in this introduction of him here. Leo Hall was the cello, fiddle, and backup guitarist for Fresh Live Crabs, a now non-existent band. He was also blind, the demon of motion, and late on his mortgage. Since his musician job had failed, he had to figure out how to pay the rent and the food bill for 18 cats with one pregnant. I did not remember that going back to the very beginning, Leo was an extreme cat guy. Because that part definitely did stick. Now here's a compelling intro. Hello, my name is Dead Ariani, and this is a story about me, my 2 sons, a girl, and some other people. And we get a big old sketch dump in the back. We've got the Fresh Live Crabs with Leo and his girlfriend, Senora, who was probably one of the cooler girls that I had written up to that point. Of course, they had a winged cyborg in the band, because why not? And then there was this guy that nobody ever really cared about. Good morning. It is sleepy, disheveled morning Lydia coming at you. I was working on editing this video and I realized I never filmed like the outro. I was just about at the end of it and I got a text from the owner of the bookstore where I work. Well, actually his wife, that he was in the hospital. He'd had an accident while working on his house. So that kind of freaked me out and I totally forgot about the outro. He is going to be fine after a little recovery period. But yeah, at the time I didn't really know if that was a little scary because he's a very sweet guy. So I hope you enjoyed this latest installment of looking at my childhood notebooks. I'm not entirely sure why I do these things sometimes because some of it is so embarrassing. Clearly my childhood self had some psychological weirdness that she was working through. Not that modern day me doesn't. I've just gotten a little better at hiding how bizarre my thoughts are is probably how that works. I think part of the reason that I share them is just to get across the idea that like people are weird and we don't always entirely understand where our ideas come from, and that's normal. And also kind of hilarious. I hope some of this might be relatable to some of you, and don't forget to click the like and subscribe if you haven't already. I appreciate you so much for being here. If you want to read any of the books that are set in this world nowadays, they are linked in the description, and I deeply appreciate your support. You can also find the link to my Patreon, where I have a $5 tier that gets you access to my Discord server, which is really shaping up into a wonderful space. We're starting to have critique groups and a book club. This month we're reading The Cartographers, which I'm hoping to pick up at the library maybe today. But either way, I'm so grateful to each and every one of you, and I hope to see you next time. Bye. There's a baby. There's a baby.